Atari 5200. While the 2600 was a top, Atari had the brilliant idea to make it successful the 5200 non-retrocompatible. Soon after, the ColecoVision and even better, the NES offered better graphics at a lower cost with better controllers. The 2600 joystick was fine, but with the Atari 5200 they turned it into a nightmare to use. And then many of the video game studios moved to the NES, making it the clear winner of the 1983-84 season. Atari leans technologically superior to the Game Boy with color screen and better graphics. It required lots of power, and its AA batteries ran out of juice very soon. It had a bulky design difficult to hold in two hands. It caused Atari to permanently exit from the portable consoles market. Atari Jaguar, marketed as the first 64-bit console, but it wasn't. It only had two 32-bit processors working together. It was difficult to program for and with very early 3D graphics. A terrible calculator-like controller. It was the final nail in the coffin for Atari. The wonderful Tempest game didn't save it. Philips CDI. Designed as a CD-based multimedia system, it became infamous for its terrible controllers and the worst games with Nintendo characters that Philips got a license to use from that deal with Nintendo for their future CD-based console that never came. At least Tetris on the CDI had a good music. Panasonic 3DO. Trip Hawkins had an idea. Same hardware shared between different manufacturers. Competition would have brought down the price and the software sales would have saved it. But the $700 price was crazy. For the same money, you could have bought both Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. The 3D were pretty good for the era, but it was killed by the PS1. Similar performances at half of the price. Apple Bandai Pippin. In the dark times after Steve Jobs' departure, Apple tried entering the gaming market by partnering with Bandai. The device was based on PowerPC Macs of the era, but it didn't have game exclusives. If you had a Mac, it was the same. The price of $600 didn't help it much, and it only sold 42,000 units. Sega 32X. By the mid-90s, the venerable Motorola 68000 wasn't capable anymore in the era of early 3D gaming. Sega was already working on the Saturn, but it still was a year away, so they had a genius idea. Released the 32X that was kinda a stopgap between the Genesis and the Saturn, but expensive and added an extra power cord plugged to the top of the Mega Drive. After 1 year, it was discontinued once the Saturn was ready. Sega Saturn. After the ill-fated 32X, the Saturn was finally ready, but it had a problem, a big one. It was initially designed as a 2D powerhouse, but when Sega heard about the upcoming PS1's technical capabilities, scared out of hell, they returned to the drawing board, adding a second processor to improve its 3D graphics. They were based on rectangles instead of triangles, making worse polygons and with less power. Because of this, it was notoriously difficult to program for. Many third-party studios left for Sony, and it didn't even have a successful Sonic game. The announcement didn't go better. Sega rushed the console in 4 months before the PlayStation, so retailers were angry because of the lack of time and in response refused to stock the console. The fans that once were Sega team got burned by the 32X scam and bought PlayStation instead of Saturn. After the disaster of the Sega Saturn, Sega wanted to work well on their next console, Sega Dreamcast. It had problems since the beginning. They gave the project to two different teams, American team and Japanese team. They wanted to partner with Nvidia and 3DFS, but at the end they chose Nvidia because 3DFS had troubles. So the American team won. Their project, a console loved for its arcade-like quality of games, launched 9/9/99, September 9, 1999. It was Sega's bet to rise from the ashes after the Saturn. It sold well at the beginning. It added an integrated 56K modem to play Phantasy Star Online. It started modern online gaming. There were true gems among the games, like Crazy Taxi, Soul Calibur, Sonic Adventure, Sega GT. But when Sony announced the PS2 in the year 2000, everybody waited for that and the Dreamcast fell down from the Olympus. Another way, because Sega failed, was that Sega Dreamcast was very easy to pirate, so Sega didn't earn much money from the games. Its reputation was already damaged by the Turkish West and the Saturn. Sega then exited the hardware consoles market, focusing on being a software company only. It later partnered with Microsoft Xbox to remake or bring a sequel to the best Sega Dreamcast games. Gizmondo, packed with ahead of its time tech like GPS, camera and cellular messaging, it had a terrible distribution network, only 14 games made, and a high corporate scandal including executives tied to organized crime. Nokia N-Gage, a hybrid cell phone and gaming console. It had a strange taco shape and you hold it sideways for phone calls. You had to disassemble half of it only to change the cartridge. The game's quality was lower than the Game Boy Advance, even if the N-Gage was more powerful thanks to the more advanced processor. It had a full button layout. Its second generation didn't help it, and it definitely lost after the Nintendo DS hit the market. Ouya, a tiny Kickstarter-based Android console for the living room packed with indie games and emulators. It flopped quickly due to the cheap build quality and latency issues and lack of top games. After being bought by Razer, its servers closed down in 2019. Nintendo Virtual Boy, marketed as the very first 3D virtual reality home console, its monochrome red and black display caused eye strain and headaches. Its clumsy tripod design made it unplayable on the move. It was Nintendo's bet on the future, but it was the reason Gunpei Yokoi got fired. They didn't have enough money to the project and they wanted to rush it between the SNES and the Nintendo 64. Nintendo 64 DD, an experimental floppy disk add-on for the Nintendo 64, almost doubling the cartridge storage. It was in development for many years, but when it finally came out in Japan, it was already too late. It released a couple of games and prototypes, with also an online service, but Nintendo quickly pulled the plug cause it was already invested in its successor, the Nintendo GameCube. Nintendo Wii U. Despite the massive successor of the Wii U was a marketing nightmare. Consumers didn't know what it was and many thought it was just an accessory for the Nintendo Wii instead of a brand new console. The pairing with the expensive gamepad with integrated screen only useful at adding cost to the retail price. It was cool that it was more powerful as PS3 and Xbox 360. But in 2012, when soon in 2013 Xbox One and PS4 got released, based on x86-64 architecture, no game developer wanted to do lots of work to port their game to an inferior game console. The games, some of them were at least pretty good, like Bayonetta or Splatoon, Mario Kart 8. So good that a good number of them got ported to the Switch, Nintendo's true successor console.